Welcome to G220 Radio. This is Ricky Gantz along with Mike Miller, and tonight we are going to be talking with Andrew Cummings. He is a missionary to Brazil with Baptist Mid Missions. And so, Andrew, welcome to G220 Radio.
Well, hey, thanks. Thanks for having me. And been looking forward to it for about a week now.
Yeah, we've connected over this past week. I was out thrifting with my wife, and we came across a couple books, and they happened to be your books. And so, interesting story. I saw them because they were, this is what they look like here, Missionary Max. All right, we see that there. And then this one here. And I seen these, and with the comic graphics, I started to kind of skim through it real quick because we were down in Amish country, and we were headed up back home soon. And so I was kind of skimming through it, and I saw it said Baptist. So I thought, okay, I'm going to give it a shot. And I came home and looked it up, and I'm like, oh, this guy's with Baptist Mid Missions. And that's right here in my area. I grew up in a GARBC church that was connected with Baptist Mid Missions. We actually had a missionary lady in our church who I'm still friends with to this day, who was employed with Baptist Mid Missions and did the Bible clubs out of our church. And cool. Very grateful for her, Miss Nancy Knopf. I don't know if you've ever heard the name or. Okay, so Nancy, yep. So small world. Great, wonderful Christian lady. Yep. And so I was familiar with Baptist Mid Missions. And so I reached out to you and said, hey, I'd love to have you come on, tell us about your work there in Brazil and these books. And so, like I said, for me, I saw it, the comics, and I thought, maybe my teenage boys would read this, because they love the comics. They love, sometimes some of the books and things they want to read. I'm just like, how is that entertaining? but so I figured, let me give this a shot. And so Andrew, why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself, where you come from, and if you have any family, and then share with us your testimony, how you came to know the Lord Jesus Christ.
Sure. First of all, when you got in touch with me, I was very excited to see that my books had made it into thrift stores. That's a great moment in an author's life, or at least I thought it was. So my name's Andrew Cummings, and my last name is spelled Comings, which is different than some other people spell it. But just think of the opposite of Goings. That's how my name is spelled, Cummings, opposite of Goings. I was born and raised most of my life in upstate New York. I was born in Ithaca, which is famous for Cornell University, and then I grew up. Most of my dad pastored. My dad's a pastor. He pastored for a few years in Western Pennsylvania, not far from Pittsburgh, and then we moved back up to New York. And I spent most of my growing up years near a city called Corning, which is famous for Corning Glassworks, in the southern tier of New York. So, if any of my southern tier peeps are watching this, shout out to Steuben County and all of that. So, like I said, I was raised in a pastor's home. So and our home was saturated with the gospel, and so I heard the gospel from a little child growing up, and so I made a profession of faith at a very early age, and I praise the Lord for that. I was and am just as depraved a human being as anybody else, but because God saved me when I was young, I did not have to. He didn't have to bring me from far from the gospel. I don't know if that makes sense. So the benefits and privileges of growing up in a Christian home, I guess, is what I'm getting at. And so then God began to work on me towards ministry, and one of the things that He did when I was 17, He allowed me to come to come on a short-term mission trip here in Brazil, and I spent 2 months. And at that point in my life, I was really resisting the call to missions. called a ministry. But when I came to Brazil, God kind of showed me, this is where you can fit. And this is, ministry can look like this as well. And so when I came back a few months later, I went to a conference, and it's was the Empire State Fellowship, which is the Association of Regular Baptist Churches there in New York. And it was in a place called Dunkirk, New York, which is up not far from Buffalo, Lake Erie area. And we were, and the theme of that conference was missions. The guy that was speaking there was from AWE, and he preached on missions. And it was there that I said, okay, Lord, if missions is what you want me to do, then I want to do it. God opened up the door a couple of years later, 1994 to 96. I came back down to Brazil. I studied for 2 years at a Bible college that we have here in Brazil. I came on a student visa, so I was kind of like an exchange student. I was with Baptist and Missions as a short-term missionary. I raised support to do it, so I kind of got my feet wet in the traditional faith missions project. I spent 2 years here in Brazil at the Bible college. My last semester of Bible college, a young lady came to Bible college as a student from a city called São Luís. São Luís is the capital of the Brazilian state of Maranhão. And to kind of give you an idea where that is, if you picture the coastline of South America with the Atlantic Ocean, most of that is Brazil. And there's a part that juts out towards Africa and then comes back in. And we're about at where it starts coming back in going up towards the Amazon. That's where São Luís is. So my wife came. She wasn't my wife then. She came as a Bible college student, and we began dating. Her name is Itaciara, by the way, and there won't be a quiz on that afterwards. People in the U.S. call her Tassi, and so we dated for a couple months there while I was still a short-termer. Then I went back to the United States. By that time, I was convinced that I needed to be in Brazil as a missionary. And so I enrolled in a small Bible college in the city of, near the city of Lakeland, Florida. The college was called Spurgeon Baptist Bible College. And it was just a small little Bible college. It has since closed. I graduated in 2000 and it closed like in 2002, 2003, somewhere in there. So, but I graduated and I dated my wife long distance, the 4 years that it took me to get through Bible college. And I went back in 1999 to get engaged. I came back here to Brazil. And when I came back in 99 to get engaged, I got to visit the city of São Luís, saw the needs here, met some of the pastors, and so that became my focus for missions in Brazil, was the city of São Luís. Graduated in 2000, got married, and came back to Brazil to get married. And then we served in our church in Lakeland, Florida for 2 years, Fellowship Baptist Church, Lakeland, Florida. Shout out to all my Lakeland, Florida peeps also. And then we were sent out by that church as missionaries to Brazil. Joined Baptist and Missions in 2002. Got to the field in 2005, spent 3 years raising support, came to the field in 2005. And so then we've been here ever since. We spent our first term working at the Bible college. I was the director of practical ministries. And then both my wife and I were spent some time being the dean of students. And she was in charge of the girls' dorm. I was in charge of the guys' dorm. And then our second term, we came up to São Luís and started planning. We worked with a church planner, a Brazilian church planner for a while. Then we struck out and started our own church. That church has its own Brazilian pastor. And so now we have two main ministries here. Our main ministry, the one that's taking most of our energy, is we're starting a camp. We bought a piece of property in 2011. The camp is the camp is now just becoming active. So we're preparing for 3 retreats by the end of this year. Next year, I hope to have a summer program. in place and so on. But we're doing a lot of building of infrastructure. And then our other ministry, our other main ministry is a Bible Institute that we're starting here among our churches to prepare people in our churches for leadership in the churches. We've identified that together with our co-workers here, our co-pastors. We've identified that as one of the biggest needs, and so we've started focusing on that. In fact, we just got back from that. My wife is teaching at that. She's teaching a educational methods class at the Bible Institute. So we just drove back from that and turned on the computer, and here we are.
Yeah.
So that's the Reader's Digest version of our ministry and our life, and up to this point. If people want more details, they can go to my website, which is called andrewcummings.com, and it's just my name.com. That's just was the easiest way for people to remember, and you can find all kinds of stuff out about us. So.
Yeah. Now, you said that with the Institute and the needs that are there, what are some of the things that maybe you've seen when you first came into Brazil, were some of the needs or ways in which you could reach the people? Was there like a hunger for them to hear the truth, or was there, like sometimes we see a lot of other, not that it's want to make these denominational things, but you see sometimes other maybe more charismatic people go into certain areas, or like I've read with Conrad, is it Conway Mbiwe over in Africa?
Mhm.
There's a lot of prosperity kind of gospel being pushed into there. What were some of the demographics there of Brazil? Like, was there a major denominational kind of push, or some bad theology there, or just kind of what did it look like when you was coming into the country?
Okay, yeah, that's a good question, and I'll try to keep this short because yeah, we could talk for a long time about this. Brazilian evangelicalism is defined by the health and wealth gospel. That's the best way I know of putting it. It is defined by the health and wealth gospel. In other words, here in Brazil, if you say I'm an evangelical, or I'm a Protestant, or I'm a crente, which is the word believer, the next thing you have to say is, but I'm not like the universal church, because there's a huge denomination called the Universal Church of the Kingdom of God, and it is a health and wealth preaching, money-making machine, preying on the most vulnerable of people, and the neediest of people, taking their last dollars, and then going on to the next group, and they have congregations in just about every municipality of over 1,000 people. Mm-hmm. and many with less. And then they have spawned, because they were so hugely successful, they have spawned other churches, throughout Brazil, other denominations. There's three main ones: the Universal Church, the Worldwide Church, and the what's the other one? Igreja Mundial, and I forget what the other one is, but there's another one. I can't come up with it right now. They're all over the place, and so that's what defines evangelicalism in Brazil. And because they were so successful, quote unquote successful, some of their theology has seeped into traditional denominational churches, like the Assemblies of God, which is a very large denomination here in Brazil, and even some denominations that should really know better. And there has been a weakening of theological thought and theological thinking and theological training. Let me put it that way, in our churches, and to the extent that one of my colleagues put it this way. He said, when I came to Brazil, he's a veteran missionary of several decades, and he said, when I came to Brazil, I was witnessing to the Roman Catholics. He says, now I find myself witnessing to the evangelicals. Because there was a time when all of the evangelicals in Brazil, the main opposition was the Roman Catholics, and all of them agreed, whether charismatic or not, they all would agree on like the five solas, broadly agree on the five solas. Now that is not the case. And so we have that's why theological training in our local churches is so important. That's why my fellow pastors here, I work with 5 great Brazilian pastors here in our region, and that's why we said that we need to focus on this. So that's one of the reasons we're doing that.
Yeah. Now you said that this pastor that's a veteran has been in the ministry for a long time, said when he came there, it was heavily Roman Catholic. Brazil is the place with the big statue of
yes,
Jesus,
Christ
right?
the Redeemer statue. Yeah.
Okay. So yeah,
Yep.
that just goes to show the influence of this bad theology that's just going out in all these places of the world and
Yeah.
being dominant. And it's really sad to see. I don't know the economics of Brazil as a in comparison to America, but they really feed on people, and you have these individuals. When you think of I think of, like I mentioned with Africa, people that are in poverty and they're giving everything because they believe that if they sow this seed or they give, they're somehow in return going to reap benefits from that. And it's really just those individuals continuing to pad their pockets while
Yeah.
these people get poorer and poorer.
Because it's a seductive message. It's a if you give the little that you have, God is going to multiply it. And so they give the little that they have, and God doesn't multiply it, because nowhere has He promised to do that. And then so then they come and say, well, I gave the little that I have and God didn't multiply it. And they say, well, that's because you didn't have faith. You didn't have enough faith. And so
now,
yeah, go ahead.
No, continue your thought. Sorry.
Oh no, I was done. Was my
I guess to think about it. So I've heard African missionaries talk about this issue. So this is not just Brazil, and I'm sure our listeners have probably heard this. One thing they've mentioned there is that those who have been burned by the prosperity gospel have kind of hardened their heart to the gospel message. And that kind of makes sense with the false teachers proclaiming a false gospel as if it's true. Have you had the same type of experience kind of there in Brazil, or there's still kind of this in somewhat maybe tender heartedness within the people you get to evangelize?
That's a great question. It's hardened the heart of the culture at large, because the culture at large has seen this, and the secular media here in Brazil is just as bad as the secular media in the U.S., maybe worse. But they've taken this and made it the subject of mockery, and have lumped all Christians in together, all believers, Protestants, in together with this group of people. And so, for example, I was in a class I'm taking some classes at our local university here, which is another whole story. But I was sitting in this, it was a sociology class. And I'm sitting in this class, and the teacher made some comment about churches, the influence of churches in society or whatever. And a girl sitting behind me said, well, we all know that they're just in it for the tithe money, and it was so casual, so matter of fact. It's just everybody knows this. So that's something that we have to, like I said, when you say I'm a crente, I'm a believer, then the next phrase is, but I'm not like those guys. We're different.
Yeah.
And so for example, when we take offerings in churches, we usually in our churches that will say it's offering time, we don't do this to get any kind of blessing from God. We do this as an expression of our gratefulness to all that God has given us. We have to give that little theological lesson every Sunday in most of our churches before the offering is taken, because the culture is just so jaded towards any kind of giving to churches.
Yeah. We've seen that when we've gone to Cleveland State. We go out and we do evangelism, preach on the streets, and there's another individual who's heretical, has some serious errors, but they also go to Cleveland State and other areas in the city of Cleveland, and people have come up and they say, "Oh, are you with those guys?" And it's the same. We say, "No, we're not with them." And
we
then
are not affiliated with them.
Yeah, and as they begin to see us interact, they often notice and recognize, okay, you're definitely not like those guys. There's a difference here. But yeah, that's definitely would be something you have to work with and work through, because like you said, people's hearts as a culture become hard to that, because you want to give them the gospel. We know the gospel is the power of God unto salvation, and it changes hard hearts. But they also have that hindrance because of how they've been wronged, or how they've seen these people manipulate to take people's money and pad their pockets and continue to get rich and drive the fancy cars and have the nice houses while they're still in poverty. And then, like you said, it always then puts it back on them, because they say, well, you didn't have enough faith. It's your fault.
And they came in on the coattails of a lot of goodwill that Protestants had garnered over the years here in Brazil. And they came in on that and completely destroyed it. Destroyed it. So it's a challenge that's probably one of the biggest challenges that we face spiritually here. That and Brazil is also becoming a more secular nation, and so we're dealing with the same issues of secularization that you are in the United States also. So when you go to pray for Brazil and your missionaries in Brazil, that those are two big ones right there.
Mike, you look like you was going to say something.
Yeah, kind of thinking about, obviously secularization is not just growing in the Western world, is kind of seen as a pathway for developing nations. And so kind of being in a kind of American context, has that provided some apologetics answers? Obviously with these people kind of, I don't know how far behind or whatnot within kind of the progressive movement, has that helped, that knowing that you've kind of come from a country that is in one sense secularizing maybe at a faster rate than it used to be, but it has this tradition of bringing in the secular thought?
Okay, where to start? That's a great question, man. So in the eyes, let me put it this way, in the eyes of the Brazilian secularist, and I'll add on to that the left skewing Brazilian secularist, I am a combination of like the worst possible, I am the worst possible person that could exist, because I'm white, I'm Protestant, I'm heterosexual, and I'm American. And so when I talk to those people, I have all of that against me, just right off from the very beginning. Some things work in my favor. I'm married to a Brazilian who is not white, is much darker than I am, and I have 2 Brazilian children. So who I think I forgot to mention at the very beginning, I have 2 sons. One is my son Michael is 20 and he lives in the United States, and then my son Nathaniel is 15. He lives here. Anyway, sorry, parentheses. the the that, like I said, that gives me I start off on the wrong foot, and it's very hard for me to have debate, to shed that kind of baggage, especially the American baggage.
Yeah.
That's a hard one to shake. I work through it because I'm, like I said, I'm taking classes at a university, and I've been able to avoid all kinds of hostility there, any kind of hostility. It's been a positive experience so far. But to give you an idea, we use WhatsApp down here. WhatsApp is a big, chat program that we use it down here. The country runs on it, and so we have a university. The philosophy department has their own WhatsApp group, and the avatar, the symbol on our WhatsApp group is the Antifa flag. So that kind of shows you the ideology, and I don't get involved in the debates in that group because there's no winning that. What I do, and the best thing that I can do, my apologetic at this point, is developing relationships with people. And once they see that I genuinely care about them and I'm interested in them, and that kind of cuts through politics, then and ideologies, then they listen to what I have to say. And the advantage I have is that Brazilians are it's very easy to make friends. They're very friendly people. They have not lost that over the years, and it's very easy to make friends and even close friendships. And so that's what God uses in a lot of cases to bring people who are hostile to the gospel to a place where they'll accept Christ, and it is the friendships that we form.
Yeah. I think, Mike, I think your wife mentioned last week when you guys did the show together about the book Rosario Butterfield, or
the gospel comes with the house key.
Comes with the house key.
And
I have not read that one yet. I read another one of hers that was amazing.
I haven't read it, so I'm just going off discussions I've had with my wife. But essentially, having an open home in which your neighbors can come in and be part of your life, and just having kind of that opening, like that is to have that shared experience, to have that relationship, and to kind of in one way model the gospel change in a family. How does a true believing family act? And to think about it in that way. She commends the book. It's changed how we've thought about hospitality and trying to be more hospitable, thinking about our neighbors more. And so part of it is, I'm just gonna try not to take too much time, is I know at times the relationship evangelism gets a bad rap, and rightly so. There are things that need to be that are concerning about it, but that doesn't mean you can't create a relationship to share the gospel and have intentional relationships, even with unbelievers, knowing that I might not be able to present the gospel right away, but if I generally care about this person and seek to invest my life in them, not just see them as a gospel opportunity, though that's what it is, but that they're a God image bearer in there. And I think a lot of times in America, we've just kind of waited for the person to respond. I'm not saying that's what you're doing, but I do think there is some ways in which evangelism and hospitality and friendships create that environment that, again, kind of softens the heart to the message.
Yeah, I think, and I haven't read Rosario's book. It's on my list because the first one I read, she does mention a couple things about that, I think, in her first book.
It was influential on her own transition
Yeah.
from
Yeah.
an enemy of God to becoming a friend of God.
The pastor that God used to bring her to Christ absolutely did that with her. But it was not at the expense of sharing the truth.
Yeah.
It was never at the expense of that. So she always knew where she stood with him and where he stood with her. And so that's one of the good things, that one of the things I really enjoy about Brazilian culture. And in fact, when people here ask me, when you go to the States, what do you miss most about Brazil? And without hesitation, my answer is always the Brazilians. So I like hanging out with Brazilians. So, that's that. It's just, they're fun people to be around. And so you can develop those deep relationships, and that leads to gospel. Like you said, there's always the balance. You can't do that at the expense of sharing the gospel. You have to be bold in sharing the gospel. But if they know you care about you, if they know you care about them, you have an in. So anyway.
Yeah. I think sometimes in American culture, we tend to forget about other cultures around the world. My wife, I had brought this up on the show once before. A church that my wife grew up in was very, very kind of legalistic in their approach to things. And they had a missionary go off to Africa, and then coming back, they said, we want to raise money because they don't have tithes over there. So we want to send them tithes. Well, I think, and I say that because culture, sometimes I think in America, we don't realize that there's other Christians around the world that are not like us here in America. And so some of those things you do get, like, even within the States, sometimes you see it. I grew up here in Ohio. And then when I was in the military in New York at West Point, and you'd go to New York City, and just the difference between the people, I thought people are rude. And then I was stationed in Kentucky, and I thought, man, everybody's nice. I go to the gas station, people are saying hi. And so it's just like within the States, different states are going to have a different kind of atmosphere. Cultures around the world are going to have that as well. And sometimes I think we got to be open to those things, and willing to say, hey, look, and be genuine. Like you said, it's not just because you're trying to get a friendship with someone to get that mark to share the gospel with them, but it's because you genuinely want to care for these people. And it's not something fake, and people see that and they recognize it.
The thing is, you make a very good point. You can't fake it. You just can't fake it. So it has to be something that's genuine. Do you love the people? If you don't love the people, why are you a missionary in that place? As the cultural differences, I grew up in upstate New York. The cultural difference between where I grew up in upstate New York, Western New York State, and New York City is just completely vast. It's two different worlds, basically. And Brazil is a big country. It's larger than continental United States. Many people don't know that. And so there are cultural differences in different parts of Brazil also. So I just visited some friends over on our last furlough. We ended up taking a quick trip to Portugal. Long story. But, same language, more or less. It's a European Portuguese and so on. Completely different culture. And the whole hospitality thing that works so great here in Brazil does not work in European Portuguese culture. So fascinating stuff.
Yeah. So you said with one of the other things that's taking a lot of your time is getting this camp together. So tell us a little bit more about this camp. What kind of brought this idea on? Is this something that Brazilians like to do, get away and retreats and things like that? What kind of brought this idea of, hey, let's get this church camp going?
Okay, there were several different things. First of my very first experience here in St. Louis was in 1999. I came up to get engaged to my wife. Her family still lives here. However, of course, I met the pastors, and they were having a church retreat that those weeks I was going to be here. One of those weeks they were having a church retreat, and so pastor said, well, why don't you come participate in our retreat? And I said, sure, I'm all for it. And so they had it, but they had it in a school, and it was cramped, and it's a public school, and they get permission from, they know someone that works in the education department, they get permission to use a school during vacation. And everyone's crowded into these classrooms, and these kids are like, we spent all week in school, and we spent all semester in school, and now on vacation, we're back in school. It was not optimal. Let me put it that way. Meanwhile, I grew up in upstate New York, and participated in a couple different camps in that area, mostly at a camp called Lamoka Baptist Camp, which is on Lamoka Lake in the Finger Lakes region of New York. Shout out to all my Lamoka peeps, if you hear me, if you're watching this. Anyway, I got a lot of different tribes around the eastern United States. But anyway, and so I grew up in camp ministry, and I'm here, man, a camp would be so much better than this. And I mentioned that to pastor. We have different camps around in Brazil also. Camp ministry is very well known and very much a part of Brazilian evangelical culture. So I'm not trailblazing anything new as far as Brazilian ministry goes, but in our area here, our churches had no camp that was theirs. And so that was in 99, and that kind of planted the seed. And I talked to the pastor, and pastor said, yeah, Pastor Francisco was his name. He said, yeah, I've always wanted to start a camp up here. So I said, all right, well, when we come back, let's make it happen. That was in 99. So we came back, we finally got to San Luis in 2011, in the spring of 2011. And we started working with Pastor Francisco, and he, a couple months after we arrived, said, hey, I was talking with a friend, and there's a piece of property available. Let's go look at it. And so we went and looked at it, and there was nothing. It was just weeds, jungle. That's what it was. And so we said, well, there's a river running behind it and all the kind of stuff. I said, this would make a perfect camp. There's nothing here now, but I can see this as a camp. And so, long story short, we were able to purchase that piece of property. Shortly after we purchased it, that was in September of 2011. In April of 2012, Pastor Francisco, we were partnering with him and planning a church. He was shot. It was a horrible thing. My youngest son was there. He was outside his house, and a guy came up through the street just shooting randomly and shot Pastor Francisco. And so it was and he passed away. It was a very traumatic time for us. But as far as the camp ministry goes, Pastor Francisco was my construction guy, because I knew nothing about construction. I knew about camp ministry, but I knew absolutely zero about construction. So we had a decision. We had lots of decisions at that point, but one of them was, are we going to keep the camp and try to keep it going, or are we going to sell it? So we decided to try to keep it going. We started building. I would hire guys. We built a wall in the front. We dug a well. We went on furlough, talked about the camp in different churches, came back, and we started building things. We built a bathroom, then we built a pavilion, then we built a kitchen. Then this last furlough, God allowed us to raise up some money in some pretty amazing circumstances, but raise up some money to buy an adjacent piece of property where we're renovating a house for dormitories. And in 2020, in the middle of the pandemic, we had our first retreat there, because that was about the only thing we could do. Everything else was shut down, but we could still go out in the interior. It's about 2 hours away from where we live. And we could still go out in the interior, and people could gather there and have the retreats. And so we did that, and it was wonderful. And people kind of bought into the project at that point. Our churches kind of bought into the project. So now I've got a team of people that work with me on the camp, and I'm kind of training them in all aspects of camp ministry. I've sent a couple guys up to the States to work at Lamoka Baptist Camp, to kind of intern there to see how camp ministry works. And they've come back full of ideas. And so slowly but surely we're getting this going. And it's kind of my, God directs our lives. And so no one knows even what tomorrow's going to bring. But as I plan for the future, I'd kind of like to dedicate the next 10 years of my life to that, and bring it to the place where we're able to just totally turn it over to the churches and say, this is your ministry. and take it and run with it, which I'm sure they'll do. So that's where we're at the very beginning stages of that now, but it's what we're doing, and I'm pretty excited about it.
Yeah. Well, before we get into talking a little bit about the books there, I would love for you to maybe share some stories, some testimonies of seeing the Lord work and provide, or in encounters with people. And then maybe some of the struggles that, the Lord has maybe worked in your life to grow you in maybe some trials that you've faced there as well.
Yeah. So where do we start? One of the things that I try to transmit to people when I'm in the U.S., and it's one of the reasons, I'll talk about this later when we get into the book. It's one of the reasons for the books, is that serving God in general, and missions in particular, is never boring. Never ever. I've been a lot of things here. I've never ever been bored. So, and we have consistently seen, let me put it this way, we've consistently seen God work through some of what we would consider some of the worst circumstances that could possibly exist for his glory. And I guess this shouldn't come as a surprise for us as believers, because he says he's going to do that. However, sometimes it still is. Let me put it that way. And it never gets old. So I mentioned our pastor. I'll just pick a couple here. I mentioned our pastor getting shot. That had to be perhaps one of the most traumatic experiences of our lives. And then it was compounded by the fact that the church we were ministering in called us to take over the pastorate of that church. And that ministry lasted, my first official full-time pastorate lasted 1 month. And because there's a whole lot of details that would take forever to get into, but basically because the widow of the pastor and his children viewed the church as their inheritance. And legally they were right, because of the way that the church property had been purchased. I was not involved in that in any way, but the way that it had been purchased, it's all in their name. And so we realized that ministry was not going to fly. And so we left. We turned in, said this is just not going to work, and turned it over to them. They took the church out of our association, and they're to this day off doing their own thing there. But we left, and we didn't have anything. We had no idea where we were going to go, what we were going to do, and that doesn't look good in a prayer letter. I don't know how many missionaries you know, but if they're honest with you, they will tell you that there's an immense pressure to have prayer letters and communications of successful ministries, and that what we went through there it's not the kind of stuff you want to put in prayer letters. However, we were very certain that God did not want us at that church, but we didn't know what we were going to do. However, in the next couple months, God introduced us to a couple families in another part of town that had been wanting to start a church. They had been a member of one of our churches, moved over to where there wasn't a church, and so they wanted to start a church. We got together with them, said, okay, let's do it. And things just fell into place. Boom, boom, boom. We had a place to meet. We had people to work with us. We had 2 families, and then 3 families, and then 4 families that formed kind of a core. And so we started the Ebenezer Baptist Church. That's a very popular name for churches down here. And so we started the Ebenezer Baptist Church, and the Ebenezer Baptist Church is going today with its own property, its own building, and a Brazilian pastor who was a guy that we kind of took under our wing. We discipled him. We sent him to Bible college. We brought him. So, but none of that would have happened had it not been for the trauma of April of 2012.
Right.
And so that was something that, that's just one example. There's many,
Mhm.
many others. While I was pastor of Ebenezer in 2018, we went through a crisis, and the largest of our founding families left under not great terms. Once again, not the kind of thing you like to put in your prayer letter or on your website. However, God taught me a lot through that. I learned a lot, and God, the Holy Spirit repeatedly had me asking myself the question, why exactly am I here doing what I'm doing through that? And I don't know if either of you have pastoral experience. This is not something that's uncommon to pastors. However, what God did in our church, and I can't go into all the details, but what God did in our church after that was 2018, 2019, 2020 were some of the most blessed years of church ministry that we had. And so, and I could go on. There's many, many different experiences, but some of them are on my website, so you can go. People can scroll through. I've written a lot of the stories there, so people can feel free to go and see that. But yeah, that's the sovereignty of God in this whole enterprise is something, we talked about it in Bible college classes, but being a missionary has made it very real, very, very real. And so I guess if you're like, what's the overarching lesson you've learned? I'd say I've learned that I knew it academically.
Mhm.
I've learned it. How do you say in English? Carnios. I've learned it in the flesh.
Experientially.
Yeah, experientially, God is sovereign, and He's good. And so all of these things are, it's been quite the adventure over the years.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was having a conversation with the individual at church this last week, and I said, not everything is black and white. Now, there's clear commands in Scripture. There's things that are absolutely there, and you can see it, and it's there. You can't get around those things. But when you're dealing with people, right? I'm not a pastor, but in counseling people or having conversations with people or trying to disciple people, and a pastor much more so, than I would. But when you're dealing with people, not everything is black and white, and you have to be willing to have those conversations. Theologically, things, but again, experientially, when you're dealing with somebody who's maybe going through a tough time of divorce and stuff. Yes, God hates divorce, but when you're dealing with that individual, there's things that you're working through, where another case, the person may be completely wrong and you just tell them, no, you need to repent and stay with your family. Yeah. But over here, you're trying to work. So not everything's black and white, right? And so you know it theologically, but when you're experiencing those things, it's like God, again, just showing you, yes, not just in an academic or mindset of knowing these things. I'm showing you, like Mike said, experientially. Yes, I'm sovereign. I'm in control of this, and I am with you, even in the good times and the bad times. I'm with you, and go ahead.
It's a term that's overused, but ministry is messy. That term gets used a lot, thrown around a lot, sometimes as an excuse, but it's true. There's not a lot of cut and dried when you're working with people and the circumstances they find themselves in and all that kind of stuff. It's and the evil one is at work. And so you run into a lot of stuff, man. Oof. A lot of stuff. And the knowledge that God is sovereign sometimes is the only thing that gets you through it.
Right. Amen. All right, so we'll kind of get ready to wrap it up here, and we'll get into your books here. Missionary Max. Like I said, I saw these books here. I'll try to show them again. Here we go. Missionary Max, this one here in the Lost City. You've got a Nazi sign on this big, scary robot-looking guy. Yep. And then here, Missionary Max and the Jungle Princess.
Yeah.
And so, like I said, I saw these. This was like comic book, art there, and I'm like, man, maybe the boys will read this. And
Yeah.
so, but what kind of brought on? I know you mentioned you're going to get into it, that missionary work is not boring.
Yeah, no, not at all. So, so the whole maybe the boys will read it. It is kind of encapsulates the whole reason why I did it. Maybe the boys will read it. So it started, number one, it started with a desire to write. I've enjoyed writing and my whole life, and I've always wanted to write books and fiction. And I was in when you were in the GRBC, did they still have the Talents for Christ competition? I was in the state and then the national writing competition for that growing up. So writing's and my dad's a writer. My dad's a fantastic writer. So he's written like lots of Sunday school material for the regular Baptist press and all that. So I always wanted to write. And so what am I going to write? I want it to mean something, but I want it to be fun, and I want people to want to read it, And some things came together. Number one, I was in my first term in Brazil. I was in my 30s, going through that kind of crisis. I was so young, but anyway, I thought, if I don't write now, I might never do it, because I don't want to keep postponing it till the end of my life, and then, it's too late. So I decided to start then. And so obviously it's missions, but what I want to write, what kind of thing do I want to write? I was watching a documentary on Indiana Jones, and it happened to mention that when the Indiana Jones movies came out, there was an uptick in young men who wanted to become archaeologists, who enrolled in archaeology programs at universities and so on. There was a measurable uptick. And I thought, aha, there are a few things based on friends I have that have been involved in archaeology. There are a few things as boring as archaeology. I mean, brushing dirt off rocks. How exciting is that? Except for those rare moments when you actually find something. Mm-hmm. It's boring stuff. But because of the movie, people saw it as adventure. And I thought to myself, missions really is adventure. Maybe what we need is our own action hero. I mean, if archaeology can have an action hero, why can't missions? And so that was kind of my thinking. And light came, well, why don't I write that? And so missionary, and then names, Missionary Marvin, Missionary Mel, Missionary and Matthew, and Missionary Max, and that one gelled. So then, the story, and so I started coming up with a story, and I had a few ideas, and I kind of got a rough draft. Back then in my first term, I had Fridays that were free, and my wife very graciously allowed me to go to a little cafe down the road and spend most of my Fridays writing. And so then I put the book online on my website, a chapter at a time, and people really enjoyed it. And I got lots of feedback. There was one dear gentleman in one of our supporting churches who would give the church updates on, well, Missionary Max did this week. So, it was just a chapter at a time. So people really enjoyed it. So then I started looking at options to publish, and it was picked up. I had a friend of a friend, and it was picked up by a publishing house out on the West Coast somewhere. That it was just a small startup, and they produced it as an ebook, and it did not hit the New York Times bestseller list in that format at all. Still hasn't. But see, in that format, it also would never have been found in the thrift store. Right. So anyway, that company got bought out, and so I made sure that I got the rights to my story, and I kind of did a re-editing of it and changed a few things up from that version, and then I self-published it using Amazon's program. I had someone edit it again. Like, it's very important. professional edit. The first book was edited much better than the second book. The third book, which is going to come out sometime, I'm gonna do a lot better than I did on the second book. But anyway, that's very important. And the other thing is that I said it's got to have a good cover. And so the book, the whole story has this comic book feel, this adventure feel. That it's just nonstop action. I try to, keep the dialogue to the minimum and kind of emphasize the action and, snappy dialogue and just nonstop things are happening. And so I was teaching English here in town, and one of my students was involved in the whole Comic-Con scene, and which we have here in Brazil. It's a big thing. And so I said, I was talking to her one day, I said, what I need is someone a really good artist who can draw the covers for my books. And I kind of described the action sequences and so on. And she gave me a list of like 10 names. She just wrote them down here. Look these guys up on Facebook. And so I did. And like the second or third name I came to, I opened up his Facebook page and there was a picture there. And it was like he had drawn Missionary Max. And here, this is the guy. And so I got in contact with him, found out he actually lived just down the road from me.
Wow.
And so Zilson is his name, Zilson. Not a believer, but he and I have become friends, and he's done a lot of other projects for me, both Missionary Max. You can see on the Missionary Max page on our website, there's a lot of his artwork there. And so all the credit for catching your eye at the store and catching your son's eyes and whatever, that goes to Zilson, because I did not draw that. I wish I could, but he's great. So we published the first one that way, and on my 2016 furlough we released that, and then book 2 was already written, and I had it edited, and then had him draw the cover, and we released that one while we were in the United States for the 2016 furlough. I really wanted to get the third one out for this last furlough. It just did not happen. It's about half written. So hopefully that will be the last. We can set Missionary Max to rest and go on with other things. But the whole point of it is to kind of present missions as adventure. And there's a lot of fun stuff. There's a lot of wacky stuff. Do you have the first book there? There's something I want to point out.
Yeah.
The first one is that's the first one right there. This is not autobiographical in any way, shape, or form. There's the guy, the missionary swinging on a vine with the jungle princess hanging on to his back. That seldom happens in real life. Seldom, like never. So this is not autobiographical. I invented a fictional island because I'm familiar with Portuguese. I had it be a former Portuguese colony, but I threw a lot of things in there. Because a fictional island, I could make it the way I wanted it. And in the first book, the hero, he's kind of an accidental missionary. He arrives on the field to help with a construction project. And the missionaries bail on him. They just leave, and he's stuck in the middle. Finds himself in the middle of a situation, mixed up in the intrigue that's going on in the island, and at the same time trying to encourage the local church that the missionaries left. And then in book 2, the intrigue. The plot thickens. The intrigue continues, and it's not just limited to the island anymore. It's a worldwide thing. And in book 3, which is not written yet, but it kind of takes on biblical proportions. So I'm going to stop with book 3, or else we're going to have Missionary Max Goes to Space or something like that. There's not much more we can do. So but anyway, that's the whole point. And the whole point of the stories. Anyway, go ahead.
So I guess the next question is, when is the movie coming out?
As soon as I get contacted by a director, but we're getting there, because this is my first podcast. So
There you
A
go.
movie deal cannot be far behind. That's what I'm thinking.
We'll add that to the list of prayers.
If any of you know Kirk Cameron, have him give me a call.
Yeah. No, yeah. I think
mean,
it's
Ricky probably knows. Ricky's the famous one. He's in American Gospel. He probably has connections.
Gotcha.
no, we
I did not realize that. Wow, I'm in the presence of celebrity.
oh no, so no, it's
Completely threw
funny,
him off.
like there's like it's like a 5-second clip or so in American Gospel, and when I've gone to evangelize at the Kentucky Derby or with these other street preachers that I know, they'll always give me a hard time, like, hey Ricky, like, you gonna sign my copy?
That's awesome.
They give me a
awesome,
lot of pulling on me, but no, I think it's great, because like you said, missions is not a boring
No.
thing, being a missionary. And it's interesting to know, because I didn't know that people wanted to become archaeologists because of Indiana Jones, because it does, the movies, they're exciting, and you think, man, this is adventure, let me go and get this thing, and big rolling stones come after you and all this stuff, but it's not how it is in real life. But with missions, you are always involved in something. There's always stuff going on, and so go ahead.
There was a disconnect when I was growing up. When I was growing up, we heard our missionary stories. Every once in a while, there'd be a story about a male missionary. Like I remember hearing a story about Jim Elliot, and that was something that would be appealing. But a lot of times it was like, what was her name? And I'm not belittling her ministry, but the missionary stories I heard, it's very small. The little girl, what was her name? It's terrible. She was from Scotland, I think, but she went to India, and she prayed that when she had brown eyes, and she prayed that God would make her eyes blue.
Is it
and
Amy
God
Carmichael?
That's the one. Yes. And that's a nice story, but that didn't do much for me as a guy, and not belittling her ministry. She's a hero of the faith, and if I think if some of the things she did in India had been taught to me, I might have been more impressed as a guy growing up. However, when I came to the mission field, I met real live missionaries. I met guys who in the early days had been stoned, not as in people throwing stones at them, not
Right.
people throwing actual stones at them, because they're witnessing for their faith. I met guys who'd been in plane crashes in the jungle. I met guys who would go out and sleep in hammocks, and then go to the next village and preach, and then sleep in hammocks under trees, and then go out, and that's like, wow, these guys are heroes. These guys are, that's heroic stuff. And God has, I think, created guys to identify with that. And so that's kind of, in a fun way, that's what I want to do with Missionary Max.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Well, why don't you go ahead and let the listeners know again where they can find more about you, your website, and
well, our website is andrewcummings.com. It's the easiest way for people to find us. And I'm on social media, on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, and on all of those, I'm Andrew Cummings. It's just the same theme running through the whole thing. So, I think you can probably see my name on the screen there. That's how it's spelled, Comings. People try to spell it all kinds of different ways, but that's how it's spelled. And on our website, you'll see I have pinned right to the top. You can see about our camp ministry, and you can see about Missionary Max. There's a whole thing, anything you want to know, and there's links where you can go and get that stuff on Amazon. So you can buy the books on Amazon exclusively for now on Amazon, and you can get those in the print version that you saw there, or you can also get them in Kindle for your Kindle. So, and if I do some things with our churches. I've given them away. I've sent 3 or 4 books to a church that we'll be having a vacation Bible school if they want to use them as prizes and that kind of thing. So if churches are interested in that, just get in touch with me through Facebook. It's probably the best way, or send me a DM on Twitter or whatever. And we'll talk. You got in touch with me through Facebook. So
Yeah,
that's how it works.
yeah, it was very interesting. I actually had to keep looking at the book because I wanted to spell it Cumming.
Yeah.
But I'm like, okay, is this right? It's got to be right. It's on his cover.
It's the way back in Scotland, we were the same family.
Yeah.
And then they branched off. I don't know if you all can see this. It's mirror imaged, but that's my family. So there's pictures of them on the site, but I didn't want to leave without showing everybody my lovely wife and my two sons, Michael and Nathaniel. So,
yeah. Well, Andrew, we want to thank you for coming on the program and sharing with us the work that the Lord's doing with you there in Brazil, and some of the adventures that you've experienced, as well as how we could be praying for you, as you mentioned,
I appreciate
praying for
it.
the Institute, praying for the camp. And so any last words or thought that you would like to leave the people with here that may watch this, either concerning Brazil and the people over there, and how else we could pray for you? Any last thoughts or words?
Yeah. First of all, I want to thank you guys. This has been great. I've always wondered what it'd be like to be on a podcast. And so this is wonderful. And I appreciate it. Thanks for getting in touch with me. And to whoever bought my book and then turned it into the thrift store, thanks a lot. Appreciate it. From the bottom of my heart. So this was, thanks a lot. This was really great. I enjoyed it. I hope your listeners find some benefit from it. As far as prayer requests, pray that God would send us workers. Both raise up workers here in Brazil and from other parts to come help us in Brazil. Every time I talk with my Brazilian colleagues, every time I talk with my colleagues who are missionaries with Baptist and Missions, and even around the world, we're in desperate need of workers. So, and if you think maybe being a missionary in Brazil is for me, contact me. I'd be happy to talk to you, because that's our greatest need right now, is workers. So that I think is a prayer request that's on. And I think if I had my colleagues here, they would all be nodding their heads. Yep, that's exactly what we need. So, and once again, thanks a lot. This has been great.
All right. Well, thank you again, Andrew. That's been G220 Radio for tonight. Until next time, God bless.